I've focused quite a lot on the cultural side of tourism so far, and I think that's because that's one of the areas that intrigues me the most, both as a traveller but also from this project point of view, trying to understand, can tourism actually help communities? And from my time and my exploration so far, I think the answer to that is yes, if done carefully. But I think also there isn't a one-size-fits-all. The way that tourism helps community will definitely differ depending on the people and the place. So here in Corazon del Bosque, where I've been volunteering for a little while, I've been learning about how tourism is helping them here. And actually it's a very different type of tourism than I've experienced so far. This is very much about bringing nature back to the community here. Corazon del Bosque started in the 90s when a group of families regained their land after the Guatemalan Civil War, and they worked together to maintain the forest here so that it can be used by the local people, so that they can enjoy the nature and make the most of it. It's a community effort in sustainable forest management, in ecotourism, and in human-environment interaction. They provide a range of different spaces for people. They've got a main area for recreation, with a restaurant selling local food, a green park, and spaces which you can enjoy, including a swimming pool. If you want to stay here, there is a little hostel and some cabañas where you can sleep under the stars or amidst the trees. They've also got a hall that you can rent out for local events like weddings or parties. This side of the park is where they earn most of their money. So it's a privately owned organisation, Corazon del Bosque. It's managed by the partnership of local families. So the restaurant, the hall for hire, all of these spaces is where they get most of their funding from. But behind this, metaphorically speaking, but also quite literally, is the forest which they maintain. And there's about 40 or so hectares of forest behind me here. It's very alpine feeling because we're quite high in the Guatemalan highlands, so there's a lot of pine, a lot of oak. You can make the most of the trails and the paths here and enjoy the peacefulness and the tranquility, which is actually very impressive given that we're right next to the Pan American Highway. It really is an oasis from that. It's also a haven for birds, so there's quite a lot of bird tourism here, which goes a little bit over my head, but apparently here you can find the pink-headed warbler. Particularly important here as well is the spiritual element. There are some key cultural sites here. This is a Mayan altar, and it's used by spiritual guides and leaders of the local area, and it's a sacred space. And that's because here in the Guatemalan highlands, Mayan culture is still very much prevalent and you can see it everywhere. So for example, most people here speak the local Mayan language, Quiche, and women dress in traditional attire in beautiful, beautiful colours. And this is a place where people can practice Mayan spirituality. There's also a big Christian influence here, and actually one of the interesting things to see is nearly a merge between some of the Christian and Mayan spiritualities. And one of the other key sites here is the Santuario de la Virgen de Guadalupe. So I'm not going to go into too much detail into how these sites are used. For one thing, I don't want to be filming these sites when people are using them for fairly obvious reasons, but also I guess religion isn't necessarily my strong point, so I don't want to assume and say anything that actually isn't correct. But what I will say is that they are used very much by the people here for prayers, for orations, for ceremonies. A lot of people come here to use these spaces. So this is a really important space for local people, and of course international tourists come here as well, but mostly I've seen local people, communities, and people from a little bit further away. And that's why it's a slightly different kind of tourism that I've been seeing and experiencing so far on my trip, because this is tourism which is very much at the heart of the community, for them, but also benefiting them. But also what sets this place apart is the value they place on the natural environment. Sustainable forest management here is a key part of their practice, to conserve and protect this forest, but also so that they can use it as a resource, but sustainably. Obviously, one of the key resources they get here is from selling the services that they provide, the restaurants, the green space, enjoying the peace and quiet. But there's a range of other ways that they use the forest. A key part of this is the nursery, which is one of the largest in the regions. Here they grow a range of different trees, mostly conifers, from seedling through to adulthood. They use these to either reforest areas of land where needed, but also to sell to local people or for local use. So this is another form of income for the reserve, as well as helping them maintain, protect and grow the forest cover. And then there's how they actually look after the forest and make sure it stays healthy, because there's lots of different threats that they have to think about, fire being one of them. Although there's not been any major incidents of fire here, there's always the risk, particularly around where the sanctuaries are, where people use candles and fire, and if it's not done vigilantly or with caution, that could cause an issue. So what they do is controlled fires every now and again, just to minimize the risk of larger fires. Litter is a huge problem here, and it drives me insane. You can be walking along the trails and find so much rubbish, when actually they provide bins throughout the trails and across the reserve. So environmental education is another key thing that they are working towards here, by setting a good example, but also showing people how they operate cleanly. And so that's one of the things I'm helping them out with here, because I reckon quite a lot of people come here without actually realizing half of the good stuff that they do, because it's not just about, using the green spaces and the restaurant and the hall here. There's so much more, from the sustainable forest management to things like clean water treatment and clean energy. There's a lot of good stuff that they do here, so I'm trying to help them create some environmental information and hopefully a bit of interactive material as well, to sort of help educate and inform from an environmental point of view. But as usual, when it comes to volunteering, I've ended up learning so much more than I originally thought I would. And this place, Corazon del Bosque, really has been a special place to learn from, just because it really has been quite a different type of tourism than what I'm used to. And it really is about using nature to the benefit of the community, but without harming it, and actually nurturing it and protecting it. And those two things can often seem quite conflicting. As a tourist, you're so used to experiencing and looking at nature, but it's often from a distant third-party point of view. But here, they actually use the nature and bring benefits from it, both financially speaking, but also socially and culturally. And yet they still manage to keep a real sense of the nature here. And this place is very much about bringing nature back to the people, but also the people back to nature somehow.